I think I'm going to introduce our guest now because I am extremely excited by this. We've had several guests over the course of the last few years, but this one I think I'm more excited about than anybody else. I will just briefly share the reason why, and that's because he's been a huge inspiration for me. I've learned so much I've done in my career, and so much of the results I get now is inspired by this particular person, who I first met. Well, I can't remember when I first met, but it's a long time ago. We're talking about at least two decades, so it's a huge amount of time. Been a huge influence on me. I'm going to bring him on screen, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about how I first came across the amazing Peter Thomson. So, Peter, hi there.
Oh, well, hi there, Mark. I mean, I'm already embarrassed and I'm already thinking, gosh, I better be darn good today, that's for sure.
Oh, well, there's no doubt about that. So I was thinking, Peter, before I came live, when did we first meet? And I'm not totally sure, but I know that I first met Steve Pipe, who many people here know Steve well. I've had him as a guest several times. I first met Steve in November 1998. I was 2.5 years into running my accounting firm.
Wow.
And I remember Steve strongly recommended The Achiever's Edge. So I went out and subscribed straight away to that. And that lived in my car every month, listening to the old cassette tapes in the car. So I definitely was listening to you from the end of 1998 in my accounting firm. And I will have met you probably very soon after then. And I know one of the occasions when Steve and I met you was when you did I think it was called the CDN with Andy Gilbert.
Yes, absolutely. CDN, which was originally the BBCTA, the British Business Consultant.
Of course it was. Yes, it was that first. Yes. And that might be where I first came across you, but I'm not really sure. But the reason I'm so excited is you've been a huge inspiration to me. And as many people here know, another one of my heroes and mentors is Steve Pipe. But I also know that Steve Pipe, much of what he learned came from you as well. So you're a big hero for both of us, which is why I'm so excited to have you here. So how's things going, Peter?
Absolutely wonderful. Despite all the doom and gloom in the papers, we're finding at the moment the business is fantastic. Business is coming out of the woodwork. We're doing more and more webinars. This year I've spent a lot of time traveling. I've just celebrated with Sharon our 40th wedding anniversary. So we decided rather than buy tangible things for each other, we'd buy a load more memories. And we've been traveling all around the world, seeing all sorts of fantastic sights. So it's just great at the moment, Mark. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, you've had a very interesting year. I've been jealous. We need to start catching up. Sarah and I have got some trips planned over the next few months. We've been busy seeing, as many people here know, Sarah and I live in Portugal. And so we've been spending most of this year just traveling around seeing bits of Portugal. This weekend we went to a place called Évora, where they've got a lot of Roman remains, which is an awesome place. If anyone's ever in Portugal, you need to come to Évora.
Yep.
I know you've got a load of stuff to share. I have no idea how you're going to cram it all in. So I'm looking forward to hearing some stuff. And there's one thing in particular. So my first question for you, Peter, I was thinking, as I said, you've inspired me so much over the years, initially listening to you on the Achiever's Edge. I went through that mentoring program with you and learned so much from that. And one of the things that I remember, you have this real talent for words, knowing exactly what to say, the great words. And one of the things that when you were teaching me how to create information products, and I was new into the world of doing webinars and teaching, and one of the things that I really struggled with being an introvert is this whole idea of selling. And I remember saying to you, Peter, I was doing webinars, but I wasn't selling on webinars at the time because I was scared of doing that, completely scared. And so I said something to you. I said to you that, Peter, I just can't sell. I'm terrible at selling. And you said something to me, which it was absolutely profound. In fact, so profound, I didn't get it at first. I had to go, because I'm a bit of a slow learner. I had to go and think about it. But then the penny dropped. And in fact, it was so profound that I often quote you when I'm teaching accountants how to sell business advisory services. And this is what you said, Peter. You said to me, I said, I can't sell. And you said to me, I remember very clearly, Mark, don't sell. Allow people to buy.
Absolutely.
So because that had such a profound impact on me, I'd love for if you could perhaps expand on that, explain to everyone here what you mean by that.
Gladly, yeah. And I remember the situation and that conversation about this. And I've had that conversation with so many people over the years. And you made a very important point about it. It is profound because it's very easy to say. And the way I say it in full is I say, when we're in business, it's essential that we learn how to sell. We've got to understand the persuasion process. And the persuasion process is a deep, deep subject. However, when we've learned how to sell, I believe that what we should do is stop selling and allow people to buy. And by that, I mean this. Don't go around trying to convince people to do things. That's a hard business. I know how to do it, but I don't do it. Instead of that, be convincing. So do the best you can do to explain what it is you have, making sure, of course, that you found out what it is that somebody wants before you start telling them all about the stuff that you've got, because that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make and why they get uncomfortable, open quote, selling, because they think they've got to persuade people, convince people, cajole people into changing their minds and buying things they don't actually want. That's not selling, that's being a crook. And that's not what we want to be doing. We want to be, as David Ogilvy said, we want first-class business, and that in a first-class way. So let me say it again, because it does take a time to sink in, because it's so easy to say, and we go, oh yeah, get it. But it isn't till we get it viscerally, that we get it in our guts, that it becomes part of us. Then life changes totally. Learn how to sell, stop selling, and relax and allow people to buy. And whatever you do, don't ever deal with the wrong people, because the wrong people will always be unhappy, even at the right price. So just, avoid the wrong ones. Don't try and convince anybody. Lay out what we have in answer to the questions that we've been asking people. Here's a little side note on this, Mark. I believe that what we need to do is allow people to sell themselves in their answers to our well-crafted questions. And in that way, we don't need to sell. All we need to do is to prepare the right questions. Like saying to somebody, if you were selling pens, you would say to somebody, do you need a pen? And if they say no, you'd say, next. And you'd move on, because you're not trying to persuade someone to have something they don't want. I'm trying to make that very, very simple, as you realize. Does that start to answer that question?
It certainly does in my mind. That for me was so profound. I now got to the stage where I actually love the sales process, albeit in my world, Peter, as you know, it's the one to many through webinars is my process. But it made things so much easier for me.
Yeah.
I forgot to say earlier, I've got another question. I've got lots of questions for you, Peter. But for everybody else, if you have any questions for Peter, please do ask. The way that we do things on these sessions is, because I can see the chat box going mad with other people here, like, for example, Brian Wright is here again. Hi, Brian. From the UK. So if you have a question, just put 2 capital Q's in front of it, QQ, then your question, and then one of those things at the end called a question mark, just because it'll jump out at me, and hopefully I won't miss your questions then, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat box. So ask if you have a question. So my next question for you, Peter, is you talked about persuasion. You talk about ethical persuasion. So I'm kind of intrigued by that. And I know that you said you're going to teach 7 steps in this session today. And so my first question, let's start with what's the first of the steps?
Excellent.
And then I do have another question come in, but let's deal with that one first.
Okay, fantastic. So I think there's a nice little simple process that I've learned over all the years that I've been in business. I've been in business now for just over 50 years. It was last February, because I started in 72. And of course, that's 50 years on. So that, just fantastic. And I've always been fascinated by the communication process. So I created a system for myself. And basically on a platform of what I call the action agenda, which I will happily explain, and the words to use to go with it. The first thing that needs to happen in a conversation is a segue between when we're having rapport building. How are you? How's business? It was raining outside. The motorway was busy. What about the price of petrol? Would you like a coffee? And all that stuff that happens, which is apparently unimportant, but actually is critically important, because when we listen actively within there, that's when we find out so much about people. And one of the things that we definitely need to listen for is this. We need to listen for whatever somebody says after they use any version of the verb to be. So when they say I am and say something, they're actually disclosing things at their identity level. And this is really important. And the reason it's important is because if we can ethically align what it is that we have to offer with who they are, not what they do, who they are, then the likelihood is they are going to buy into, remember, we don't have to sell it, buy into this idea. Professor Robert Cialdini, in all of his works, calls this commitment consistency, which I think is the most misunderstood part of his work. If we can find out what someone has previously committed to, we know that they tend to remain consistent with that. And how do we know that? Well, we'll know it at their identity level. And this is why people will never consistently do who they aren't. People never consistently do who they aren't. So listening carefully in that supposedly inconsequential chatter, we find out some great information. And then we segue from there in what is called the opening, because this is the 6 stages and it's done on a platform of the action agenda. So the 6 stages are open, gather, present, adjust, conclude, and follow. I'll go through it again. So I'll talk about the agenda in a moment, but we need open, gather, present, adjust, conclude, and follow. Now you'll notice that it's open, gather, not open, present, because as Tony Alexander, a famous presenter in America, says, prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. Isn't that a fantastic expression? Prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. So we don't go in open and start telling people about what we do. We open and then we start asking about what their challenge is, their problem, their opportunity, and we go from there. So here's an example of an opening. So let's say I was talking to Mark. So Mark, as I understand it, the purpose of our meeting is to do 3 key things. Number 1 is for me to understand where you are now, and this will be in the context of that conversation. Where you are in your business, what's happening, what's going well, what may not be going well. Secondly, so you can explain to me exactly where you're trying to get to in the future, and you might even put a time frame in there if appropriate. And then how by working together, we can get you there more smoothly, more easily, and perhaps even more profitably than we considered before. Have I got that about right? Now you can hear the process of, there's a lot happening in that short few words, but it's a very simple system. It's based on the rhythm of 3, which is the rhythm that humans like to listen to. So as I understand it, Mark, we're going to discuss the purpose of our meeting. The purpose of our meeting is to discuss 3 things. Number 1, where you are now. Number 2, where you're trying to get to. Number 3, and you just throw this sentence in, how by working together, we, and you've changed, the pronoun has changed now, we, not you, not I, we together now, how we can get you there more smoothly, more, and then a question at the end. Have I got that about right? To which Mark will, I'm almost certain, I've never had anybody say no, by the way, so people say yes. And we then follow up by moving into the agenda. So we'll do the agenda bit, then we can wrap it all together as we go through it. So when Mark says yes, I then say 18 power words. So Mark, I've been thinking about our meeting. That's a statement. You don't say that bit. And I've prepared an agenda, another statement. So you then follow it with a question. Is there anything you'd like to add, passing over the agenda? Mark, inside, if we think about this, when you say, I've been thinking about our meeting, you change the whole dynamic, because most people haven't been thinking about the meeting, and if they have, they haven't said so anyway. So sometimes you have to say things that are happening. I've been thinking about our meeting, and the recipient of this message in my role play here, Mark, is thinking, oh, this person's serious about it, and I've prepared an agenda. Wow, that's a bit different. Is there anything you'd like to add? Now, what does Mark have to do in order to answer the question? He's got to read the agenda. Well, if we put the agenda in the right format, we have started to program Mark's mind and his thinking about the conversation. So there isn't time today to go through the whole agenda, but the item number 1 on the agenda is this word, background. Mark, you're able to see the comments, aren't you? But they come in a little bit late. I wonder if anybody knows what I mean by the word background on the agenda. What might it mean? Well, I'll just have a sip of my tea while we're doing that bit.
Yeah, please do. If anybody, what does Peter mean by background? Let's see if anyone comes in. We have got a couple of questions coming as well. So, Deborah, we'll get to your question in a bit. We haven't forgotten that. Let me just see. I think we've got a shy bunch at the moment, Peter. Nobody's coming with an answer. So,
what people have said to me is it's the background of the meeting. It's their background. It's your background. It's the background of the economy. And the beauty of this is it can mean any of these things. So when the first item on the agenda says background, then the person reading that goes, I know what that means. And you then get a halo effect into the other items on the agenda. We're wanting to make this process as smooth as possible, just being convincing, not convincing them, just being convincing, and doing it in such a way that people sell themselves, if they wish to, in their answers to our well-crafted questions. So we've got a lovely opening with a rhythm of 3, and all of these things are based on this concept. When you make a statement followed by a question, if somebody answers the question, they don't question the statement. I'll say it again. I'm saying it slowly. When you make a statement followed by a question, if somebody answers the question, they don't question the statement. So I've been thinking about our meeting, statement, and I've prepared an agenda, statement. Is there anything you'd like to add? Question. And the rest goes just smoothly in the communication process. So shall we pause at that point and look at the questions?
Yeah, sure. And I remember you said just earlier that you mentioned commitment consistency from Cialdini. And I remember that was one of the first, I think you interviewed Robert Cialdini on The Achiever's Edge. And I remember listening to that one, was fascinated by it. So I rushed out to buy Cialdini's book. And for me, that's one of my favorite ever business books, the 6 principal laws of influence. They stick with me and I use them so often, and commitment consistency is one of them.
Yeah, indeed. And the fact there's 9 now, really, if you think he's recently added a family as the 7th one, but there's also the other ones about a contrast principle and stuff like that goes within there. So we'll probably touch on that later.
Yes, because he mentioned in the book, he actually started off the book with all about the contrast principle, and he talks about the 3 buckets of water. But that wasn't one of the 6 then. He then went into the 6 different chapters or sections of the book. And I always thought, shouldn't have been 7. Yes.
Well, actually, there is 7 now. He's added a 9th, as I would call it, about family, which is also very powerful.
Okay. I didn't know that, so I've learned something. Okay, the first question here, when I saw it, I smiled a bit because I know what the answer is. Deborah Schaefer says, hi, Peter, have you authored any books?
Do you want to put me on full screen?
Yes, do that.
If I move out of the way, these are all my informational products, although they're not all my informational products. So all of these are mine, but there are more. And you may be able to see in this picture above me here, those are all mine as well. So just a few bits and pieces over the last 30 years, indeed.
Yes, you've done a lot, because you used to, and one of the first times I started working with you is you were teaching how to create information products. And you still are the expert in this. And I remember you had, you created not just books, but audio programs that used to sell through Nightingale Conant. And you were regularly one of the featured experts there. So yes, lots and lots of books.
Yes, and I believe, Mark, that everybody who's an accountant, a bookkeeper, a business owner, whatever, a profit advisor, should have a book. And for me, it's the number one marketing piece that you create because it sets you apart from the crowd. It's the ideal thing to use as a lead generator, and you could not have a better business card than a book, because people don't throw books away, but they throw business cards away.
So true, so true. I do have another question, but I'm going to come to that one later because I think it's a long question and it's a little bit off topic. So I'll come to that later, Peter. So it was interesting that you've been talking about this idea of this action agenda, which is, I remember when you first taught that. In fact, you first taught that to Steve, because that script you gave, it was actually Steve that taught me that. But he did tell me afterwards that it was from you. And so when Steve and I worked together at AVN, we would teach the power of having an agenda for every single meeting. And when I heard that in my accounting firm, I made sure I had standard agendas for different types of meetings. They were so powerful to keep a control of the process, the meeting. So, do you want to go into the next? We've talked about open and gather.
Yes, definitely. So, well, we've talked about the agenda and we've talked about the opening. So now from the opening side, what we're going to do, we're going into the gathering stage. And the gathering stage is all about asking questions. So I've already made the point, but I'll say it again, is we allow people to sell themselves in their answers to our well-crafted questions. So we work all of these things backwards. So we work from the fact that the client is now experiencing the benefits and the outcomes that they came to us for in the first place. And we're saying to ourselves, well, what does that look like now? Great. And then we come back upstream a little bit and say to ourselves, so what is the information that I will need to know from the person about their current situation in order to know for a fact that what I have to offer will help them either solve this particular problem that they've got or help them capitalize on an opportunity that they're looking at. So how do we do that? Well, we ask the questions about the current situation. So what, in the context of the conversation you're having somebody, really it's what's happening now. But there's a special way to answer this. And it takes someone back to the point when either the business started or they started within the business, and you ask this question and you listen carefully for the answer. And this is just mind-blowing stuff. You say to somebody, tell me, which is a command, by the way, but you say it gently, tell me, why did you start in this business? Or tell me, why did you join this firm? And you listen carefully to the answers. Now, if they give you the answers to a why question, in other words, because I wanted more money, because I needed more freedom, because I wanted more time in my life, myself and my family, you know within this context, these people are options-based, right? If, for example, however, they answer with a story, and a story, in effect, is a series of snapshots. So if you think of a series of photographs in a row, that's a story. So if they say to you, oh, well, I met this guy in a restaurant who we were chatting and he was introduced to me, and it was the 17th of December, blah, 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 and then we arranged to meet and this happened, you know that this person is procedurally based. And therefore, when you're explaining what it is that you can do, you reflect this style, because active listening is the critical part of selling. And so when we're asking the questions, there's no point asking these questions unless we actually bother to listen very, very carefully to the answers to understand that person in detail, so that when we start to talk about what it is we can do for them, we are presenting it in a way that matches what they're looking for. So we'll find out what is the current situation, and we'll go into the details of that. So instead of thinking, oh, well, ask about this, ask about that, ask about something else, imagine that each item is an apple, and we keep asking questions. In other words, we keep taking a bite out of the apple until we get to the core, because we want to go deep in every subject. Because when somebody is explaining to us what the problem is, we need them to understand themselves how deep the problem is and the emotional and financial and potentially physical downsides that they are experiencing at the moment. This is why away motivation is the catalyst for action, and towards motivation is the continuation of action. So what we need to find out from the person is the pain, is the problem, is the difficulties they're experiencing at the moment. And as we're asking our questions about that and they are stating their answers, they are re-feeling those pains. And so they are creating for themselves the catalyst to want to move away from that problem. The problem with away motivation is it runs out. Imagine, for example, there's a big block of ice over there, and I was stood by it, and we're together, and we're stood there together. We would be motivated to move away. But as we move away from the ice, its effect upon us diminishes. So there's no longer any impact of it. And here we are in the middle of nowhere, comfort zone, they call it. But over down that end of the corridor is a friend of ours, and they've got a glass of whatever we like to drink, and they've got a joke or an anecdote to tell us, and there's a warm fire. And that's towards motivation. So away motivation is the catalyst for action, but towards motivation is the continuation of action. So only talking about features and benefits and advantages is we're only using the power of towards motivation. Whereas if we start by talking about the problems, the difficulties, the pain in detail, remember we can only ask the questions, then we are creating massive away motivation, which is the catalyst for action in the person that we're interacting with. Mark, do you want to come back in there and make any comment on that?
Yes, you said something earlier, but that whole point about motivation was interesting. I teach the same thing in terms of when we're having a conversation with a potential client, for example, we should always focus on the problems, the challenges first, because people are more motivated by the avoidance of pain than they are by the attainment of gain, which is exactly what you've explained in a very clear way. You said earlier, though, it was interesting, you talked about active listening, and I remember you teaching me that. And it was actually funny you said that, because I've actually been practicing it while you've been talking, because I find as perhaps many people do, in situations like this, perhaps talking to clients, in my case, having an interview with you, it's so easy to start thinking about the next question you're going to ask and not listening to the person. And so I was listening, because you said active listening, which is extremely powerful when you taught that. Do you want to just briefly explain, for those that aren't sure, what you mean by active listening?
Yes, indeed. And you're making the point that very often what we find ourselves guilty of, and I'm the same, is that we're waiting to speak, aren't we? That's the problem with it. Somebody tells a joke, and if you're a joke teller, you're waiting to tell your next joke. You know, we're waiting to speak. We've asked our question. We pretty much know what the answer is going to be. And again, we're waiting to ask the next question. So this was a technique that I learned from Dr. Dan Lee Dimke, based in Texas. Funnily enough, a lot of people from Texas. He was based in Texas. And I learned so much from him, a genius of a guy, a real genius of a guy. And he called it the echo technique. I learned it, added some bits to it, and I gave it a new name, and I call it rapid repeat. And because that's what I do. I learn stuff, I add stuff to it, and then I give it a new name. But I always credit it back to the original source, as I know you do, Mark. So the rapid repeat is this. When somebody's talking to us, what we do quite simply is we talk along with them in our minds, not out loud, repeating what it is that they say in the exact words they're using, in the exact tonality they're using, at the same speed exactly. So it would sound as if there was a slight echo. But we can't keep doing that all the time, because it takes too much brain power. But that's the idea of it. So you just keep on talking inside your mind. Now, there's a couple of things you need to be careful with when you do it, is because you're so intent on what they're saying, you can end up doing this. And you can end up staring at them. So be very careful with that. You need to be relaxed about it. Practice in the car or watching TV or something, or when you're the third party in a conversation, and just be talking along to practice it so you become fluent with it. And the other thing to be very careful with, and a few people unfortunately make the mistake with this, is when they're talking in their mind, they move their lips. because they've just got that link between them. And I know somebody, a guy I know in Wales, I taught him this technique. And when I was talking, he was doing this and moving his lips about, which is just crazy. So what this does, it holds your concentration. And what I've found with this little simple technique is it means that you can recall information that people tell you. Why? Because you're hearing it more than once. You're hearing it a second time. You're hearing it a second time. Somebody says it. It's like when you get introduced to somebody, when they say their name, in your mind, you say it. You rapidly repeat. I think it's one of the best techniques I've ever learned, because I know when I've asked clients questions, I've had the information, I've remembered it, I've stored it, and then when I recall it and say it in the exact words that they've said to me, in other words, I haven't paraphrased it, I've parrot-phrased it, then you can see the look in their face that they go, this person was listening. And so that's very powerful. To bring back in, because we're moving into the presenting stage in a moment, the other side, a different technique on this, is I call dynamic listening. And one of the essential parts of being persuasive is our ability to speak fluently, powerfully, persuasively, without stuttering and stumbling and adding in lots of filler words like, you know, basically, sort of, kind of, etc. Why? Because it spoils the fluency. But how do we do that? Because everybody, naturally, me included, have filler words. I remember on one of my audio programs, I used the word situation 27 times in the first 30 minutes, and I had to re-record it. It was just a habit. How do we do that? Well, all we simply do is to recognize that when we are talking, this is the time we should be listening even more than ever before. And instead of just hearing the sound of our voice, we listen to what we're saying. And instead of using filler words, it's ever so simple. We do what we do when we're writing. We leave a space between the words. In other words, we use silence. So if you think of it as writing out loud, you wouldn't dream of writing an email that started off, well, it was great to, sort of see you the other day, semicolon, because kind of, well, basically, I'm like, you wouldn't dream of writing that rubbish. Right? So all you do is write out loud. So listen to your voice and be calm about silence. Because unless you leave too long, nobody will really notice anyway. So that's active listening and dynamic listening. So we've got an opening. We've got segue from the opening into the agenda. I've been thinking about our meeting and I prepared an agenda. Is there anything you'd like to add? No. Right, they've looked at the agenda. They've got the background item, which then I would say was, say, Mark, I would say, so tell me, Mark, with that look in your face, so tell me, Mark, how did you get involved? Why did you get involved in this business? I might use how, but usually why? Why did you get involved in this business? And I'm going to listen carefully to that answer and the style of the answer. And then I'm going to go into my gathering stage, thinking about what is it I need to know and what do I want Mark to feel when I finish my questioning. Because I want him to feel a number of things. I want him to think a number of things, and then I probably want him to do something. I want him to feel this person is interested in me. I want him to feel that problem is difficult. That problem is costing me emotionally, financially, etc. And I want him to be now motivated to hear what I have to say as a possible solution. Because remember, I've set it up that that's what's going to happen with the opening. The purpose of our opening is for me to understand. In other words, I've asked a question, and then to know where you're trying to get to. That's another set of questions. So then by working together, we can get you there more smoothly, more easily, and more profitably than we thought before. I've got that about right, haven't I? Have I got that about right? Yes, click. So that's the route map that we're going through, is we're doing all this. So we come to the presenting. So now we are going to present what it is, and we will then start to segue, use the word for about the 7th time today, into the pricing. Now, how could I possibly be talking about pricing with Mark in the room, but you know what I'm saying. And what we're now going to do is we're going to, from that point of view, when we've presented, and by the way, the presenting is the smallest part of the conversation. Most people think presenting is the major part. No. Most of the selling has already taken place before you get to the presenting. Why? Because the gathering is the big bit. Right? If you've got an hour with somebody, you've got chitter chatter for 5 minutes, you've got the opening and the link and the whatever for 5 minutes, and then you've got 35 minutes of gathering. And then you've got 5 to 10 minutes at best of presenting, because it's already happened. All you're doing is confirming what was already discussed in the gathering stage. So you're confirming what you can do, and now we're going to start to talk about price. I mean, here's an expression for you. I worked this out years and years ago, and then when I interviewed Bob Cialdini, I found out what was happening because I didn't know the technical part of it. And the reason I found out was I listened to Bob talking to somebody and explaining also to me. And I said to him, it seems to me that you are using two words more than any others. And these two words are before and then. And for me, in my mind, that is a timeline. You're saying something and you're saying before that, this happened. And then you're saying something else and saying, then this happens. And therefore, I've got this picture in my mind, being a very visual person, of a timeline. And so I'm feeling that it's what happens before is important. And I've got my expression for it I developed years ago. And this is what he said. He said, what we need to do as persuaders, professional persuaders, is to create the climate in which ethical persuasion takes place. And that's what we're doing by what we say. So here's my version of it. I'm going to say it quickly to start with, hopefully smoothly. It's what you say before you say what you mean to say that makes the difference. And it's also what you do before you do what you mean to do that makes the difference. So if you put the two together, it's what you say and do before you say and do what you really mean to say and do that really makes the difference. And hopefully I got that out. In fact, I did get that out right. But you understand totally. It's always what you say because you frame somebody's thinking. So if, for example, I was going to talk about price, I would obviously frame it first. And I would frame it, and Mark, I know you talk about this a lot, yeah? And it's just so important. Let me give you an example of it. Years and years ago, we'll talk about the opening. I used to sell, and we're talking when I wore a younger man's clothes, to quote Billy Joel, right? I used to sell phones for cars, car phones, yeah? Not mobiles, car phones. And the way that I would sell those phones, I would wander around Birmingham in a short sleeve shirt, a pair of trousers on decent days, and I would run up to people who were getting into nice cars, right? And I would say, slightly breathlessly, excuse me, can I use your car phone? And they would go, I haven't got one. And I would go, come this way, right? And that was the opening, because you've got to grab people's attention with the opening, which was fantastic, right? And it was a process I'd worked out. You know, I'd sat there and worked these things out. And then when it came to the price, I would say to somebody, my accountant tells me that he charges his time. It's a long time ago, this, by the way, at £50 an hour, right? So forgive me, it's a long time ago, right? And he's, and forgive me for the second bit, Mark, and he's just an accountant, right? So, but I used to say this to people, right? So you're a professional businessman, you're an entrepreneur. How much is your time worth? Is it worth £500, £100, £200? And you always, with numbers, go high, low, medium. That's the way it works, right? And then people would say £200. And I would say, well, we've already agreed that by having a phone in your car, you can effectively use 2 more hours a week, right? Which is £200 times 2. And I would do it like this, as if I'm stupid. 2 times 2, that's 400. And so £400 a week times 4.3, I don't know, what are we talking here about? Just shy of £2,000 in a month? So if your phone was less than £2,000 a month, it would make sense to have one, wouldn't it? I mean, how I had the gall to say that, I don't know, but I did. And people would say yes. Why? Because you don't have to sell anything. You have to craft the questions that make people sell it to themselves, right? And that is the contrast principle. I then say, well, actually, the phone is the equivalent of £1 a week after tax. Do you think one would be enough? Right. Right. And people would laugh. They do exactly what you're doing. They would laugh and say, yes. So the conversion rate, I mean, I know I'm having fun at the street selling, but you know, it's 90+%. And all of these things work just as more noughts on the deal. That's all it is. It's understanding the absolute process of how this works. So we open, we agenda, we gather, we then present, which is 5 or 10 minutes. Right? We then handle in the adjusting stage any confusion. Historically, this would be called handling objections. But usually by the time we've got to this point, but they aren't really objections, they're questions. But most people aren't good at asking questions. They make statements instead. So if somebody thought something was expensive, they don't say, tell me how can I afford it? Or can you explain to me how can I afford it? They don't say that. They go, that's expensive. So if you do get an objection, it's probably as a statement. And all we need to do in our minds is to convert that statement into the question they meant to ask. And then we ask them if that's what they meant. Right? Would you like to know more about Thomson? They say, yes, of course they will, because you've translated it into the question they meant to ask. And then you answer the question, and then again, you then move to the concluding stage, which is asking them if they'd like to go ahead. Now, people have said to me, that's where I really struggle, Peter, is to bring the sale to a conclusion. What do I do? Got a few ideas on this can really, really help. Firstly, let's understand that there are far more clients in the world than there are you. You are unique. There is no one like you. You have your knowledge, you have your experience, you have your expertise, but you have a special ingredient as well. You have your take on it all. You have that special bit, which is your combination of your personal experiences as well as normal business experience, and it's your take on it. So we don't want to undersell ourselves or diminish the fact that we are different. We're a one-off. We are unique. You can't qualify unique. And therefore, why would we not be prepared to try and help somebody? But how do we do that? Well, here's the first idea. We don't ask blunt questions because we're not trying to convince someone. Remember, we've got to this point in the conversation where we've opened with agenda, we've gathered, we've adjusted, we've presented, we've done all these bits and pieces. And now there's massive rapport. And I would say something like this. Is that something you might be open to? Would you like to go ahead with that? I mean, as gentle as you like, as gentle as you like. Why not? Because it's so easy. Because if you do this way, the chances are that so many people will say yes. Very few people say no. The conversations I only have conversations with people I want to have conversations with anyway, as you would, right? You qualify the conversation first. Of course we do. Otherwise, we're wasting our time, aren't we? But is that something you might be open to? Would you like to go ahead with that? As simple as that. So that's the first point. The second thing is, and I learned this water skiing. I haven't been for a long time, but when I used to water ski, right, and I could come up and run and across the wake and all that, but I wasn't very good at making that curtain of water, but I could do the basics, And I asked somebody, I said, how do you cross the wake? In other words, there you are, hanging on, behind, your arms are straight, your knees are bent, you're on one or two boards. Let's say you're on two skis at the time. It's in the early days of you learning how to do this. And I said to somebody, well, how do I cross the wake? That hump of the water that's caused by the boats, right? And the guy said to me, you just do it. And that was the best piece of advice, because if you've ever had that experience, and be interested to know if you have, all you do, I mean, if you're technical about it, you press down on one foot and slightly lean that way. You don't need to know that stuff, because we're human beings. We can do this. And you just go, and you cross the wake. And the first time you do it, you're elated. You might fall off, doesn't matter. You get, I know how to do it. It's the same with closing a sale. We know how to do it. We've been doing it since we were 6 months old. Right? We've been closing sales on our parents and our aunts and uncles and grandparents ever since we were babes. We know how to do it. We just ask. Right? And we ask at the right time, the right way, to the right person. Why would we dream of asking at the wrong time to the wrong person in the wrong way? That would be crazy. So we just do it naturally. We are naturally persuaders. It's what we do as human beings. We spend our life persuading people. We persuade suppliers. We persuade somebody to go out with us and connect with us. We persuade all day long. All communication is an attempt to persuade someone else to do or avoid doing something now or in the future. We are in the persuasion business. So relax, because next. Some will, some won't. So what? Next. That's the way that it is. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of clients waiting to know what you know, waiting for your knowledge, experience, expertise, your take on it, that special bit that you do. There's hundreds, thousands of them, right? Why would you be worried that one might say no? If you say no, it's probably the wrong person anyway. Let's be convincing. Let's not try and convince anybody. There you go, Mark. Over to you.
Wow, some fascinating stuff there. I'm going to pick up, as you probably would have expected, on the pricing piece, and love what you were talking about with the contrast principle. I'm a big fan of price psychology, and as you know, Peter, in price psychology, the most powerful principle in price psychology is this whole idea of anchoring. And I think the contrast principle is a specific application and a powerful application of anchoring, and so I always tell people that before they reveal a price, they have to create that contrast. And I remember you once taught me that phrase, which I'll let you tell me, which always stuck with me, about without contrast. If you want to explain that.
I will indeed. And if you don't mind, I'll segue into attribution errors at the same time.
That would be great as well. Yeah, please do.
That really will help. Is that without contrast, everything sounds expensive or cheap. And the problem is, you don't know which one it is. I'll give you an example. We could go out together in any country, probably in the world actually, and we could find somebody that we gave a $10 note to, who would then feel wealthy. We could find somebody in that same country that we could give $1 million to, who would not feel any wealthier. Right? So unless we totally understand how the person we're talking to deals with money, deals with value and pricing, then we can't quote, because price has to have elasticity. So I'll wind this into a couple of things here, if I may. Let's just talk about attribution error. One of the standard attribution error is that we tend to judge other people based on their actions, but we judge ourselves based on our intentions. Right? So we say, oh, that's what they do, but oh, this is what I mean to do. Let me give you an example of that. And this is where identity comes into play. Somebody turns up late for a meeting, and we turn around to our colleague and we go, they're always late. In other words, we are saying that's who they are. They are, see, there's the verb to be. They are always late. To be is when you get identity level, right? They are always late. Another meeting comes along and we turn up late, and what do we say? You wouldn't believe the traffic out there. It was so busy, it was foggy on the way. I left enough time. It wasn't me. Right? Why? Because we label other people by their actions as though it's who they are, and we label ourselves by our intentions. But this comes into pricing. And this, for me, is another attribution error, is when we charge fees. And I've found over the last 30 odd years dealing with coaches, consultants, speakers, trainers, accountants, etc., that the attribution error is this, is they work out the pricing, the fees, based on their own perception of their value of themselves and their time, instead of working it out on two levels: the value to the client of the outcome that they can achieve, but even more than that, the value of the value. And what I mean by the value of the value is the value of the financial implication. So if we can make somebody $100,000 more, that's great. But it's $100,000. What does that mean? It's bits of paper. It's numbers on an account somewhere. But what does it really mean? What's the value of that value? How is it going to change their life? Are they going to buy a new house, a new car? They're going to feel more secure? What are the feelings that we're engendering by the creation of that monetary value? So it's the true value of the monetary value. In other words, I call it briefly the value of the value. And once we start to understand the value of the value, which is the gathering stage, right? This is why we gather so much. When we understand the value and the value of the value, then we have the contrast created in order to be able to quote our fees. Why? Because without contrast, everything sounds expensive or cheap, and we don't know why, which is why we have to, and this is what Mark talks about so much, take control of the thinking of the other person with regard to the finances that we're talking about. When we're talking about what it is we do, it splits into two parts, which is part of the presenting stage. And there's both the offering and the offer. Now, the offer ring, think of it as a ring, right? So we're going to put things in the ring. And in the ring is what it is. What's this product? What's this service? What it is. What it has, right? What are the various factors of it, right? What it does, right? That's all the offering. The offer is the cash, it's the money, it's the bonuses, it's the payment terms, it's all those things. So if we separate these two things, that we do that offering, what it is, what it has, what it does. And here's another little extra bit. And this separates you from the crowd, by the way, and why you have decided to deliver it in this way. That's the special little extra that makes that offering special to you. What it is, what it has, what it does, and why it's in this way, right? So, for example, I do a lot of webinars, right? So why is it in this way? If I was talking to somebody and doing it in that way, well, so you don't have the cost of going somewhere, or you know all the benefits for doing webinars and lives. You understand that, right? So that's the offering. Then the offer. Before we do the offer, we will already earlier on have found out what is the value of the value. There's a question that's often called the Dan Sullivan question, but I developed this myself, and I'm nothing against Dan. I've interviewed him, a phenomenal guy, 40 years ago, right? And I used to say to people, so let's imagine we've been working together for a year, you're loving it, we're having fun with the serious intent. Let's have a look at the financials of this. Tell me, how much extra per month do you want that relationship to have created for you per month? Is it, if they don't answer immediately, I would say, is it $50,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month, high, low, medium, right? And they will usually say, well, no, about $20,000 a month. Okay, extra. And that's $20,000 extra? Yes. So we're talking $250,000 a year, round term. So in 4 years, we're talking you want to make $1 million extra. Have I understood that properly? Yes, great, okay. Well, I've got some great news. Oh, what's that? It's not going to cost you $1 million to do it. And there we are. We've got that contrast automatically sorted, haven't we? I'll give you a real example of this and really bring it to life. I was dealing with a big insurance company, a division of them. They got 300 salespeople. And I was dealing with the sales manager and the sales director, and they wanted me to put together a personalized video, audio training pack, right, for all these people. And the fee was going to be a chunk of money. And so I asked this question. I said, tell me, how much do you think you're losing per salesperson per month for whatever reason, knowledge, experience, expertise, attitude, whatever it is? And they paused. I said, is it £10,000 a month, or £1,000 a month, a couple of £1,000 a month? They said, it's at least a couple of thousand a month. I said, okay, so 300 people. And tell me, how long has this been going on for? You know, is it a 5-year problem, a 1-year problem, 2-year problem, or at least a couple of years? I said, let's work it out, shall we? So 300 salespeople that would £2,000 a month, that's 600,000 a month, times 12 is 7.2 million, times 2 years is 14.4 million. Tell me, do you earn commissions on the salespeople's turnover? Sorry, did you miss commission on the salespeople's turnover? Right. And if you didn't do anything, would the situation change in the next year? No. Well, so we're talking 20 odd million. Great news. It's not going to cost that. What they actually paid me was £250,000 to create this 10-module program and teach it to the managers and the training team. So I didn't have to go back to do anything. I could do it once, right? But that's using the contrast principle. That's why it comes into play.
That's an extraordinary. I remember you telling me about the first time. Extraordinary story, and it is extremely powerful. some people may know, I teach it as it's all about quantification and extrapolation. The extrapolation, make it a bigger number, which is exactly what you've talked about. And then when it comes to revealing the price, which again you've mentioned, I use the phrase chunk it down. Make the price as small a number as possible. You mentioned it could be you could go as far as a daily amount, but certainly I would never recommend anybody in the accounting profession reveals their price as a total figure, like an annual figure for doing the tax return. You chunk it down to a monthly figure at least, and make the number really small.
Yes, we used to call it reduction to the ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a lot of research in the world of psychology that demonstrates that works. Even when people know that they can multiply it up to get to the real number, they are still influenced by the smaller number.
They are. And especially, as you say, when it's followed the bigger number, which is when we've grossed up the situation, and we're not, you see, this is where the integrity bit comes in, Mark, isn't it? We are not doing this to manipulate people. We're using our persuasive skills to get people the result they came to from us in the first place. Why? Because we've gathered before we presented. Brilliant.
Genius. I'm conscious of time. I'd love to keep going, but we usually finish on the hour. We had got a question came in from Deborah earlier, and I have a really important question for you as well, Peter. Let me ask my question, which is because it might actually help with the answer to Deborah's. So my question is, Peter, how can people find out more? I know you've got so much great stuff. You've written so many books and created so many courses, but what's the best way for someone to find out more? And I think you've sent a link to Sarah, which she's going to put into the comments box. So if you're in Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever, there'll be a link coming very soon. Peter, do you want to describe what's behind that link?
Yes, most definitely. You know, I said earlier, and this is perhaps how I can help people really at a fraction and we really make a big difference, is I believe that everybody should write a book, right? And so I'll hold this in front of me, actually, if I get there. Okay, there we go. So this is my latest book, How to Write a Book for Your Business in Just 10 Weeks or Even Less, right? It attracts clients, increases your reputation and makes more money. And of course, it's the best business card you could have. So I'm doing a 3-hour webinar, and I'm doing it twice live, and I'm doing it, they are early mornings, but it is recorded if you can't make the time. So I'm doing it on the 24th of November from 10 o'clock in the morning UK until 1 o'clock. And I'm doing it on the 3rd of December, which is a Saturday morning, just for a change, from 9 till 12. And it's detailed, it's called Your Book and Beyond, because it's not only how to write a book, it's how to actually then make the book get printed or published. And it's then how to use the book for lead generation and also for turning that book into other powerful, profitable informational products. That 3-hour webinar has a ticket price, and it is $50. That's it, $50. And if you can't turn up, not a problem either, because also that you'll get a copy of the recording and all the templates that I use to go with it. So the various checklists I use, the various creation tools I use, give a copy of that. And I'll also give you a copy of this book as well. So you can have this as the written version, you can have the video version, and if you turn up live, then you can obviously be asking me questions as well. And I know that Sarah has the link, and it's actually peterthompson.club/Mark. peterthompson.club/ oh, there it is. Sarah's put that in the chat for us. peterthompson.club. You'll notice there's no P in my Thompson. It's THOMSON. peterthompson.club/Mark. And other than that, obviously I have peterthompson.com. So if you want to get in touch with me, then by all means do so.
Awesome. And if you're not on YouTube, if you're somewhere else, Sarah will be putting that link into Facebook and into LinkedIn. That should arrive very soon. Okay, probably time for one more question then, which is one asked earlier by Deborah, because you've talked about the action agenda. She says, wonderful, Peter. I'm a little embarrassed for not doing my research. She asked about, have you written books? Which of course you have. She says, which book has your action agenda in it? Or how can you find out more about it?
The easy way is to probably just go onto my main website and just send me a contact information, send me a message, right? And then what I'll do is I will bounce you some information on it. Uh, Most of the books I've taken, and this is the reason why books are so powerful, is they're the start of the journey of sharing your knowledge. And they usually then end up in not a £10, £20, £40 book, but they end up in something that is far more detailed and powerful. So I will happily send you Deborah, I'll happily send you some information on the action agenda. I've got a short written piece that will add a bit more detail to what I was talking about today.
Brilliant. And I see Peter Smith says that he will be joining you on that webinar on a steal at $50. Absolutely is. It absolutely is, because I think I paid you about, it was a 5-figure sum for you to spend a year mentoring me, teaching how to create things like a book. And it was, I wish I could have paid $50 instead. That is just priceless. That's such powerful stuff.
But it's not just the book. It's your book and beyond. Because I tell you what's the beauty of this, Mark, just a little point on here for general marketing, is I have this concept in my head, which is inner labels and outer labels. And when we're trying to find people to market to, it's very easy to find people by their outer labels, profession, where they operate, turnover, all that sort of stuff. But there are no lists of people's inner labels. And inner labels is what they're thinking and what they're feeling about a particular situation. And the way in which we find those people who aren't on lists is in the title of the book. So having books with titles on, which we can offer out in the marketplace, download, physical, all those different ways, we can then access those people that other people aren't accessing, right? So it's really powerful. So, for example, if people wanted to, let me say, I can think of it in this way. People are looking for a new boat, right? None of us sell boats, I don't think, right? There aren't lists of people looking for boats. There's lists of wealthy people, but if you wrote a book that was aimed at new boat owners, then you would find people who aren't on lists. Does it make sense?
Wow. So much amazing stuff, and some great comments coming into the chat box, which I'll be reading through in a short while. But let me just wrap up with this one from my friend Bill Robinson over in the US, because he sums up nicely. He says, "Brilliant talk, Peter. I fully appreciate now Mark's enthusiasm at the beginning of this webinar for having you on. Thank you for sharing your insights on active listening and how to better connect." Because I was, for those of you who joined late, I was very enthusiastic because Peter's one of my heroes. I've learned so much over the last 20 odd years. Much of what I've learned is all thanks to you. So I strongly recommend to everybody, if you found some value here, and you'd be crazy not to, do check out the webinar. Check out. Go and visit Peter's website. I will probably at some point ask you to come back, Peter, I think, because that was so good. We may do another session sometime, because you have so much knowledge in the area of product creation, using the right words, the sales process, and so on. Is there any final things you want to say, Peter, before we wrap up?
Well, firstly, I would say thank you for all the kind words you've said, and thank you for all the comments that you've been sharing with me. It's been wonderful. And yes, and I think my final point would be is that the biggest lesson that I've learned, apart from contrast, which it's part of, is it's always what you say before you say what you mean to say is critically important. And whatever you do, learn how to sell and stop selling. And allow people to buy, because you do not need to convince people. They need to convince you.
Peter, thank you so much. That's been absolutely awesome. And can't wait to catch up with you again sometime soon, hopefully not too long, perhaps in Spain or Portugal. we'll catch up.
Good idea.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Peter. I'm going to play out with some music in a second so I can read the comments. I'll put those up on the screen. Just a quick announcement for everybody. I will be doing a live session, a bonus live stream, same time as this, on November 30th, the last day of the month. It'll be all about sharing some thoughts, some ideas on how you can make next year 2023 your best year ever. So make a note in your calendar, November 30th for that bonus session. Thank you so much for coming along, and that has been an awesome session. And as a thank you for coming, as you know, we also make a contribution to that B1G1 project. I will see you soon. If you've enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button or the like button wherever it is you are on social media. And also, I'm going to play out with some music so I can read your comments and put them up on screen. Thank you for coming along. Bye for now.
I wasted all my time, I wasted all my nights, I wasted it on someone who's indifferent. He didn't love me right, he told me I was blind, but I never really wanted to listen.